Hello, everyone. Welcome to my DMA lecture recital, given in partial fulfillment of my dissertation portfolio project. I am excited to share with you an unpublished work, Concertino for French Horn and String Orchestra, written by Roberto Milano, a prolific American composer who spent much of his career in Puerto Rico. It is an excellent piece of modern music that deserves a wider audience, and I hope that my piano transcription, recordings of all three movements, and today's presentation will help to make this work known and accessible to other horn players. So here are my goals for today. To discuss the significance of the concertino in horn literature, to introduce Roberto Milano and his compositional voice, to present my transcription process and interpretive decisions, and to advocate for its place in the modern horn repertoire. The challenging elements of Milano's horn concertino are similar to those of other canonical solo works, such as Paul Hindemith's Sonata for Horn and Piano, 1939, the Gordon Jacobs Concerto for Horn and Strings, 1951, and the Jane Vinieri Sonata for Horn and Piano, Opus 7, 1943. These elements include range, rhythmic and harmonic complexity, and technique, among other aspects. Later, I will go into greater detail about Milano's polytonal and neoclassical compositional style and the demands in his solo horn writing. So why this work? 15 years after Milano's death, Concertino for French Horn and String Orchestra was first recorded in February of 2020. It was performed with soloist Joshua Pantoja, current principal horn of the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra, and accompanied by a group of students who were part of the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music String Orchestra. The project was under the musical direction and production of Emanuele Olivieri, a conductor committed to working on other musical projects by Milano. Olivieri emphasizes the importance of making recordings of Milano's works to safeguard the legacy of key figures in national music. I reached out to horn player Joshua Pantoja and asked him if he knew about any horn concertos from Puerto Rico. He told me about the Milano Horn Concertino. He sent me this unpublished piece and told me that he premiered the work in March of 2020, just before the pandemic shutdowns. His premiere recording is available on music streaming platforms, and upon hearing it, I immediately fell in love with the concertino because of its unconventional and modal harmonic progressions with an impressive ability to showcase the horn's high range and power. This beautiful work is one of 4 concertinos for wind instruments recorded on the 2020 Quattro Concertinos album. All 4 of them were written at the end of Milano's life between 2000 and 2005. The horn concertino has 3 movements, fast, slow, and fast again, and is approximately 15 minutes long. This concertino was never published, and there is only a single orchestral score copied from the original manuscript. The 4 soloists and student orchestra who participated in the recorded album were scheduled to present the concertinos live during a concert in April of 2020, but it had to be canceled due to the start of the quarantine to curb the spread of COVID-19. By the end of the year, this album was selected by the National Foundation of Popular Culture as a top 20 best recorded album of 2020. The 4 concertinos have yet to be published. As I look for more sources on Roberto Milano, the only published entry about him I could find, other than on the Oxford Music Online, was a bibliographical entry for Roberto Milano by researcher Cirilio Toro Vargas in his Diccionario Biográfico de Compositores Puertorriqueños. The biographical entry for Milano mentions his works such as Tres Danzas Sinfónicas, the opera El Espejo de la Reina, and Concierto para Viola y Orquesta de Cuerdas. But the horn concertino and the other 3 concertinos written at the end of Milano's life are not mentioned in this biographical entry, since these concertinos had not yet been known. If a horn student or professional musician were to come across Milano's biographical entry in this source, they would not find the horn concertino, as it is only mentioned in online articles that promote or review the recorded album. I see a specific need to promote Milano's horn concertino, since it is not able to be purchased and it is not mentioned in any repertoire listings. Puerto Rican ethnomusicologist and humanities professor Emmanuel Dufrasne Gonzalez is a leading researcher of the spread of Puerto Rican music and culture, who puts focus on the influences of the bomba genre of music and ties to the African diaspora. Gonzalez likens Milano's style to Hindemith, Vaughan Williams, and Britten. He describes the horn concertino as having luminous harmony and uniquely modal and spiritual. He describes moments of martial rhythm and also moments of exaltation. Overall, Gonzalez says Milano's style reflects both Puerto Rican color and European lineage. This shows Milano was very well received by leading music scholars in Puerto Rico. He is quoted in a local news article saying, "All the passages of the work unfold in an organic, natural, and logical, yet surprising manner. The second movement is slower, yet intense, with surprising and very pleasing changes in harmony. Sensations of mystery and revelation are perceived with growing tension and intensity. Then, perceptions of calm, peace, origin, and renewal emerge. Passages in intervals of fourths can be heard in the strings, as well as pizzicato effects. The third movement has a martial character. A dialogue ensues between the soloist and the orchestra in the B section, and the recapitulation returns that martial character." So all that to say, Gonzalez is lending credibility to Milano's ability to compose with the artistry of other modern era composers. So now let's talk briefly about Milano's background. Roberto Milano was an American composer of Italian-American descent. He was born in New York City on April 5, 1936, and he died in Toa Baja, Puerto Rico on January 30th, 2005. He was one of the leading figures in concert music in Puerto Rico at the time. He composed for orchestra, chamber music, choirs, opera, ballet, and film music. From his arrival on the island in 1976 until his death in 2005, Roberto Milano devoted himself completely to his creative and pedagogical endeavors, leaving a vast repertoire that encompasses several musical genres. There are over 200 works archived at the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music in San Juan. His early training in music theory, harmony, and composition was with Salvatore Congolosi, who was the organist at St. Patrick Cathedral in Manhattan, New York City. When Milano was 16, he won a composition competition sponsored by the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Soon after, he studied composition at the Manhattan School of Music. While at the Manhattan School of Music, he studied composition under Vittorio Giannini, a leading neo-romantic composer, Nicholas Flagello, a composer inspired by late Romanticism, and Ludmila Ulala. Ludmila Ulala was a leading composer and music educator in the mid and late 20th century. Here, I have one of her most notable music theory texts, titled Contemporary Harmony, Romanticism Through the 12-Tone Row. It was published in 1966. So this means that Ulala would have been working on this book shortly after Milano graduated. To give insight on Milano's university training in composition, here is a quote from Ludmila Ulala that gives context on how she viewed music theory as an educator. She says, "The writing of today is not divorced from the 19th century. In fact, it carries on the growth which started at the beginning of musical time. It is a cumulative result of varying influences, affecting each composer in a slightly different way. The individual characteristics of a composer do not remain his sole property, but become absorbed by the next generation. each musical step forward is accompanied by a renewal of some traditional forces. Ludmila Ulala is saying here that the progression of music composition will always have ties to the past and traditions of counterpoint and harmony. I believe Milano's compositional training from Ulala directly influenced his compositional style, which avoids serialism and the avant-garde in his music, but actually leans toward more conservative triadic, modal, and neoclassical harmonies. In 1960, Roberto Milano joined the US military, where he taught harmony, theory, and orchestration at the United States Naval School of Music, as he continued writing his own compositions. He later completed a master's degree in musicology at the City University of New York in 1966. He wrote his master's thesis on 13th century antiphons and responsories. Antiphons are early forms of sacred Western chant, and responsories are essentially solo liturgical calls and tutti choral responses. At the same time, he studied theology at the George Mercer School of Theology. He had been teaching and composing at the Naval School, but eventually moved to Puerto Rico. According to local articles, Milano visited Puerto Rico at the invitation of friends in the 1970s and decided to settle on the island in 1976, where he quickly served as the cultural advisor to the municipality of San Juan and facilitated the founding of the San Juan Youth Symphony Orchestra. Later in 1981, he was ordained as a priest of the Puerto Rican Episcopal Church and helped found the Institute of Sacred Music to develop liturgical music in churches of all denominations. After teaching for several years at the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico, he became faculty of the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music in 1995, teaching music theory courses and helping revive the composition department there. He dedicated himself to composing for the institution's various ensembles, from elementary to advanced levels, and also for faculty members. He often wrote for the university orchestras under the direction of Professor Emanuele Olivieri, who later directed the recording project that I mentioned earlier. Milano helped the conservatory by writing compositions as an act of service to the institution, while also teaching composition courses. By the year 2000, he had composed 7 operas and composed works primarily for choirs and orchestras. He has over 200 compositions archived at the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music. For much of his life, Roberto Milano wrote music tirelessly, leaving behind invaluable music while as a professor of the Puerto Rico Conservatory. His most commonly known works are 4 pieces for string orchestra, 3 symphonic dances, duo for viola and piano. His opera, The Queen's Mirror, is considered the first opera for children written in Puerto Rico. He also wrote Concerto for Viola and String Orchestra, Piano Concerto, and Symphony for Orchestra, as well as Requiem 911. From 2002 to 2004, Roberto Milano composed 4 concertinos for 4 professors at the Puerto Rico Conservatory of Music. The 4 concertinos are written for horn, flute, saxophone, and clarinet. According to the manuscript of the horn concertino, this work was dedicated to his faculty colleague Rafael Enrique Irizarry, who was and currently is director of bands at the conservatory to this day. Milano passed away the following year, and he did not hear these works performed. So why did I transcribe this work for horn and piano then? I chose to transcribe from string orchestra to piano in order to allow the piece to be more easily programmable on recitals, conferences, and other performance settings. The piano part I transcribed maintains all notes in their original pitch space, with very few exceptions. I never removed a note from polychords unless it was doubled in another string instrument. The only changes made were idiomatic musical gestures that the piano cannot imitate, such as a sustained pitch over multiple measures, tremolo flourishes, and spacings larger than one hand can reach on the piano. To fix these problems, the sostenuto pedal can help to sustain the long notes in the cello and double bass, while changing chords in the violins can be played above those sustained notes. So without the sostenuto pedal, all of those pitches will blend together momentarily. Not all pianos have a sostenuto pedal, so the pianist alone can decide whether to use the sustaining pedal or play molto legato and allow the bass to decay in those moments. Short tremolos had to be omitted for playability, but the flourishing gestures in the string parts can still be played on the piano. Lastly, when chords cannot fit on one hand, I had to displace a note by an octave to make it fit in the hand, or I had to displace a note by an octave to give it to the other hand. This piece poses many performance challenges for horn players, such as technique, high range, and physical endurance. The most challenging aspect of this concertino is the constant position in the highest tessitura of the horn. Milano wrote with a deep understanding of horn capabilities. He includes time to breathe, time to rest to the embouchure, and he understands the horn's idiomatic nature, from delicate and soft voice-like melodies to the most exclamatory and robust characteristics of the horn as well. I noticed the horn part does not include slurs in the third movement, so I added them based on what the strings have in their melody. Milano writes incredibly well for the horn. I made musical decisions about the tempos and whether to differ from what is indicated. The reference recording takes tempos in the first movement slightly slower than what is marked, and I agree with that decision. The first movement is marked 116 BPM, but the 2020 recording averages about 108, with frequent rubato between section transitions. The second movement is marked 108 BPM, but the reference recording averages about 88 BPM. In my opinion, I think playing this movement too slowly will cause fatigue, so I am averaging my tempo close to 100 BPM to match what is marked and to keep the movement from slowing down. The third movement is marked 96 BPM, and the reference recording plays slightly faster at about 100-104 BPM. The third movement has two cantabile sections that slow down in the reference recording. And at first I disagreed, but I learned while rehearsing the cantabile sections that maintaining 100 to 104 BPM throughout the movement can hinder musical expression. Now, let's discuss the compositional elements of Milano's horn concertino. The opening statement of the first movement has D major over inverted E major in measures 1 through 3. Here's what that sounds like. Inverted E over D. So those opening gestures will sound like now by bar 4, he's kept that gesture, but he's shifted it down to an inverted C major chord over B flat. So measure 4 will sound something like this. Now we'll talk about rhythm. Rhythmic features, Milano frequently uses are hemiolas, time signature changes, other things as well. These provide interruptions to driving duple eighth notes with changing patterns of duple and compound groupings. He is constantly changing that pulse with compound meter or irregular meter. In regard to melody, Milano writes for horn and strings with frequent calls and responses, which create a dialogue between the soloist and the string orchestra part that you will hear reflected between the horn and the piano in my transcription. And remember, his master's thesis was on responsories of the 13th century, so you are going to hear elements of this, particularly in the second movement, which is more pensive and more free in tempo because of all of the call and response dialogue. And lastly, in regard to form, all three movements are A, B, A prime, or rounded binary. In regard to harmony, Milano's tonal language for this work is entirely modal and often in the Lydian dominant mode. Lydian dominant just means it is in the Lydian mode, but with a dominant seventh. That means the scale degrees are 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, flat 7. So as Milano develops these melodies, he modulates by raising the main themes by a half step, rather than to a related key. So Milano is not using the conventional tonal language to move from one tonal center to the next. In fact, he is mostly using parallel motion, which is something that theory professors forbid entirely. His tonal language in this work is based mostly of parallel motion. The movements do not end on triads, giving ambiguity to major or minor modes and finishing each movement with open fifth intervals or a unison pitch. The last note of the work is a unison F sharp in all voices, void of any tonal implications during the exciting ending. Milano's music reflects deep musical intellect through his compositional decisions to emphasize modality, polytonal harmonies, and unconventional chord relationships, giving us much more than major and minor sonorities. His album, Quattro Concertinos, challenges the wind soloists and brings recognition to his reputation as a composer worthy of promotion. My transcription brings it one step closer to the horn canon, and I hope Milano's unique compositional style can be enjoyed by all who come across his works. So where does this work fit into the horn canon? This horn concertino exemplifies neotonal language, idiomatic horn writing, strict form, and mature expressive depth. There is room for this piece to be analyzed and studied further. The work is accessible, but very advanced, proving to be a valuable addition for recitals, recordings, and horn pedagogy. This work also fills a gap in Puerto Rican horn literature and will add to the limited modern repertoire we have in the neoclassical style. Milano's legacy deserves recognition within the larger scope of American and Latin American classical music. So what's next? This work is an excellent example of conservative modern and neotonal harmonies and asymmetrical meters. Milano is an Italian-American composer from New York City whose influences on music in Puerto Rico, in Puerto Rican communities should be recognized and promoted. This horn concertino has all of the characteristics of standard horn repertoire. Since it is not listed in any modern sources, I will aim to change this for new editions, promote the piece at regional and international horn workshops and conferences, and find a way to get this work published through the conservatory in Puerto Rico, accessible and downloadable for horn players, and able to be performed for university-level studio classes, undergraduate and graduate recitals, and other professional concert settings. I see myself continuing to find works without piano transcriptions for other works for horn and large ensemble to horn and piano. This project has strengthened my interest in the vibrant music of the Latin American world. Continuing this research could include horn works from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile, and many other nationalities of South America. Thank you for watching my lecture recital. Before performing the piece for you now, I will leave you with this quote by Roberto Milano. "My fundamental mission as a composer is for my music to touch the hearts of those who listen to it, from heart to heart, and nothing more."